Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1282. Yeah. So we now entered into a more, call it drilling deeper into the dynamics of what essentially Avodah accomplishes, what the human being on this earth, a neshama, a soul and a body, comes into this tachtainim, this dark world, and through the process, through Torah mitzvos, generates a higher state of consciousness than existence has on its own. I'm just putting it into simple English so we know what we're talking about here. So there's three components here. There's the world in which we live. There's the human being, the soul, the neshama, who is the primary force that accomplishes, like the first human being placed in the Garden of Eden, to serve and to protect. So the world was created in 6 days, and at the end of the process of creation comes the human being. To serve and protect, as we explained, is to tend to the garden and make it grow far more than it would grow naturally. And the way we do it, the method to do it, is through the divine instruments called Torah and Mitzvos, which is God's blueprint for life. The Torah and Mitzvos are the actual tools and methodologies of how we turn a dark, a hostile, a selfish world into a divine home. So that's just a very short summary of the very essence of what we're learning. Now, in the language of Kabbalah Chassidus, the language would be that there is a certain element of divine presence and consciousness and energy in just existence itself. And there too, there are levels. The difference, for example, the general world and the part called Gan Eden, paradise, just as it was in the beginning of creation. God created an entire earth, an entire universe, but one special section called Gan Eden, where he invested more divine energy, more revealed divine energy. Just like we say, on this planet, we have many different countries, but Israel stands out. And in Israel itself, it has a higher holiness, a higher state of Kedusha. And in Israel itself, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, says Gan Eden. And then there's the human being that comes to this earth, both in the beginning of creation and each one of us in our time in history, and have a role to play to generate even greater energy, what he calls a chodosh ultimately. Well, I should not skip. First is to generate more energy. As I said, in Gan Eden, you add, increase more. That's through Torah and mitzvahs, and done with love and with kavanah, with intention. In other words, not just doing mechanical mitzvahs, which is just the body of a mitzvah, but also the neshama of the mitzvah is also the kavanah, the intention of it. Until we reach the highest levels of intention, where we do it with all-consuming love, and which is also b'chol meidecha and mesiras nefesh, which draws down the or chodosh. So not just that you're drawing more energy into existence, which is also an achievement, that's Eris and Kalim, but ultimately you also want to draw down completely unprecedented energy. Now, revealed it will be in the future, when all our work that we've done now and everything we've accomplished, which has generated all this energy, and it's been stored, but it's not revealed to us except in certain measures, as we spoke earlier about the reward we get in this world. So we do have something from the mitzvah. Yud K in the form of Mem Tzadik in the Levush, Vav K, certain individuals and souls that had a taste of that, of the future revelation, and also those 4 items that we spoke about that also have a me'ain of the future of a gili of Yutke. Or we're talking here something unique, but in the future, it will be in full-blown fashion. So the last piece we've been covering is the question that he asked. We still need to understand why mitzvahs alone are not enough, and you need the mitzvahs to also be done with this passion and this full, all-consuming love, chol meidecha, b'siris nefesh, to create, to generate, and draw down that gili from etzem. So to say that you draw down, yes, you draw down eris and kalim, even the mitzvahs that are not fully, that are not saturated with this deeper love. Like he explained, even with the main kavanah of Kabbalah soil, or the kavanah of the Seid Pnimi of a mitzvah, like he explained earlier, like let's say tefillin, when you are the intention of binding your mind and the heart. But if you want to chodesh in the fullest sense of the word, that's where the mitzvahs coupled together with the great love of b'chol meidecha and the mesiras nefesh of complete commitment, complete devotion. In the next paragraph, which we began learning yesterday, he said v'oid. And additionally, there's another factor here that's very important, and that is, and here is going deeper into what the neshamas. He did mention at the bottom of 1281 that dafka deved the neshamas from b'chinas mesiras nefesh, but he didn't really speak about what the neshamas add in this equation. He spoke more about what mesiras nefesh and chol meidecha do, because they reveal the innermost resources of the neshama, because it's not just avodah based on logic, al tibitam v'das, irrational. It's coming from the deepest parts of the person when they are mesiras nefesh, are giving all of themselves. And as we referred to earlier pages where that was discussed, the bottom of page, what was the page? Bottom of page 1253 and 1254, we discussed mesiras nefesh. So now we're getting into what is the neshamas themselves also have something that are necessary in this whole process, which will also add explanation why mitzvahs alone are not sufficient to draw this whole etzem. So we have now the neshamas, and the neshamas plus mesiras nefesh will really explain the full picture of how we actually transform the very world, not just the keli, the container receives energy, but the container itself becomes energy, reveals the divine core essence from where it's rooted. And like we said earlier, and indeed also nourishes and feeds the soul, the oir. It actually the oir becomes, it receives from it, as opposed to how it is now that the keli receives from the oir, even though it has the power to draw air because of its deeper root. So what did we learn? Let me just sum up. So he went back to what we learned back on page 1251 about the quality of neshamas. So there's a state of a neshama that's like biti, that receives from the Torah. Like we begin. How do we begin? God gives us the Torah, and we learn it, and we receive instruction and guidance from the Torah. So we're the makabel, and the Torah is the mashpia. Then there was a level, if you remember, Tanoim and Amirayim, Poskim, the people who study Torah and can have the authority to pass a ruling in Torah. They're like achesi, they're like siblings with Zoh, with the Torah, like partners, if so to speak. And the difference, he said, was the first level was more like a servant of the king, and the other is more like the ministers that actually are part of the process of strategizing and passing rulings and so on. And then there's a level where the neshamas are mashpia in the Torah, and that's imi. So that's just a little refresher of what we learned earlier. But here he's going to focus on mostly the neshamas alamayla mishedish hatera mitzvos. So again, he says shedish hatera mitzvos, because when it comes down below, neshamas also have an element in which the Torah is higher than they are. And the rai muchachas lezeh he brings is from tshuva. From a tshuva, which the fact that a person can transgress what it says in Torah mitzvahs and yet can return and reconnect, tells you that the desire and pleasure of God as he connects with the neshamas on their own, that's the proof that they're higher. And that's why Yeshlemer, he says, Alkein Yeshlemer, that this is the Tainug Atzmi Mamish. Lamaylam Chinas Tainug Atzmi V'rotzna Atzmi the Torah Mitzvos. But it's Atzmi, which means it's concealed. It's not something you can easily access, as we discussed. It takes real avodah to get there. But it's there. So the Etzem HaNeshama is higher than Torah Mitzvos. And that's when he says, the Hamshachas Er Chodesh Mamish Zeh Dafka Ali De Avedis HaNeshama Dafka. That the real, if you're talking about truly, he calls it Er Chodesh Mamish, as I pointed out many times in Ayin Beis, because of the nuances. Sometimes he'll say it's Mamish, sometimes it doesn't say Mamish. Now, it's not just semantics. It means that you can have a new, unprecedented energy, but it's more relative to what was there before. You say Mamish, you're talking about in the fullest sense of the word on the highest level, is Dafka Travedus HaNeshamas. And even though he continues, the Hamshach is Ayidei HaMitzvos, Makom Mokim. In other words, even though they need mitzvahs to draw the energy, it's not just a neshama comes down to this world and it just sits and meditates and draws down energy. It needs mitzvahs to do that. Mitzvahs are the channels. The Torah mitzvahs are the channels that which God created that give the method that the neshama employs in order to draw down this new energy. We're not talking about the tools and instruments in order to be me'orer. How do you reach a place that goes all the way back to the engine room, to the source of it all? And you're not just getting energy that is through Elikim and Tzimtzum for the creation of existence and sustenance of existence. You're not just getting energy of Mamala Kalalman, which is more energy, but it still relates to existence. You want to go all the way back to the source before all this energy was generated in the first place. It was like going back to pre-creation, pre-Tzimtzum, all the way back to the source. You can get a Chodesh Mamish. That's the neshamas because they're rooted there. So to be ma'ir and mamshich, b'chinas atzmo sein sof, b'chinas Chodesh Mamish dafka devedes and neshamas, ube'etzem nishmasam. So he adds, not just the neshamas are rooted there, but the Aveda also has to be with their etzem and neshama, which is what he said on top of the page, is Mesiris Nefesh, etzem and neshama, she b'chinas help. At the top of the page is Galos etzem and neshama. And that's where we stopped. So now he's going to continue to explain. So what is the difference between the Rotzen Atzmi and Tainug Atzmi of mitzvahs and the Rotzen and the Tainug Atzmi of neshamas that he said above? It's seemingly using the word Atzmi on both. And we know, as I explained yesterday from the Tana Devei Eliyahu, that they're both Kadmul Elam. They're both higher than existence and both are necessary. And yet, we're saying here neshamas are even higher, and they're the ones that really are critical to generating this completely new, unprecedented energy. So now he's going to explain that in language that we learned earlier. So he's going to go back to the Oisius, if you remember about Yud Kei Vav Kei, and that mitzvah is Yud Kei Vav Kei, except the Mem Tzadik replaces the Yud Kei as an exchange of the Chiluf of Adbash. Well, before I continue, even though I think this is going to explain this whole idea, but just in case somebody wants to ask something, just to clarify everything I've said till now, I'll be happy to elaborate. Okay.
Yes. When you related it to the what we're learning now to BT Chosi Imi, as you were saying, BT is the level of the servant. Chosi is the level of like the Rabbanan plus poskim. So I'm wondering what Imi is. What is that? Any Jew that's worked doing Torah mitzvahs with serious nefesh is able to mashpia, bring his or chadash into Atzllus or into that level? Is that anybody's available? It could be Imi, or is that just only like poskim or probably the Chamin could be? Chosin?
No, it's connected to Imi. He talks about it on page 1251. The details, what neshamas, how they're mashpia and Torah. But yeah, the details are there, and it's connected to this. Yes, that the neshama in general is mashpia. So if you look on page 1251, he explains how Torah is more connected to the moichin, and the neshamas connect more to the etzem. The whole peeps on in the Torah chachal iskayim, in the Torah miskayem esel b'misha meimis atzmai. There's a whole piece there about the commitment. So it's like we say on Simchas Torah. There's Torah's mashpia in Jews, and then when we dance with the Torah, we draw something into the Torah from even a higher level.
So
that's on page 1251, 1252. I would strongly advise looking there. There he spells it out in detail.
So it seems like everybody could be at the level of Imi. Every Jewish neshama, if they were able to access the voda serious nefesh.
This is not unique to Ayin Beis. This is all of Chassidus. Every Jew can be in Tanya, even a Kal Shebekalim. He explains in chapter 18 and then 19 about that every Jew has a chelik elokam mal mamish, and by virtue of that can have Mesiras Nefesh, Aveda of Etzem and Neshama. However, obviously there's a difference between a tzaddik and a regular person, but everybody has that. I mean, that's what Yom Kippur is about. So, yeah.
But I just want to make a distinction because it seems like not everybody could be at the level of a hosi, like a minister of Torah. Only Talmidim Chachamim could do that. No?
Everybody has an element of all three. Maybe not in the full way as a posik, but you could still learn Torah, and it says that every person who learns Torah is able to contribute to the Torah. And talking about halachas, is there authorities that the rule, but everybody has the capacity not just to receive from the Torah, but to learn and be mechadish. You can write a chiddush in Torah right now. I mean, it has to be consistent with the rules of Torah, but this is what people do. They say pulpulim and they deliver talks and they say ideas. We contribute in that sense.
The Rabbi is encouraging it, and it's a mitzvah.
Yeah, la fashaba. But let's not digress. You're going now again. This is your pure processing. This is not the intention here in Ayin Beis. But the fact is, everything that we learn here is really accessible to everybody. Let's just suffice with that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now he says, "Va'inyanhu." So I'm reading on the line on page 1282. The line begins, "Bechinas chadash." It's something like 11 lines from the bottom. And the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along the text, which is in Hebrew, and I translate and explain. So va'inyanhu. The inyan in this is, the inyan in what? What we just said, that the true chadash mamish, a completely unprecedented energy, is dafka vedus haneshama and be'etzam haneshmasam. The inyan is barely ill, because now it was explained earlier. And where's earlier? Let me refer you right away. Right here. Page 1274. So Aleph Ayin Dal Resh. If you look at the second paragraph, he's going to now sum up briefly what he discussed there. Okay, 1274. So that is 8 pages back. He said like this: the mitzvahs heim ba'isi is the Havaya. So mitzvahs, there he used the word tluyim ba'isi Havaya, because that's the expression in based on the Zohar and other sources, that the mitzvahs are, and the isi Havaya are connected. Like he said there, that's why mitzvahs are called Havaya or orchos Havaya, the mitzvahs of Havaya, mitzvahs Havaya, or orcha, the paths of Havaya. He said, like Krishma is connected with letter Yud, is tied, is toli, so-called hanging on, but dependent on, or Yud, Tefillin, or Hey. He just gave 2 examples there. And furthermore, the mitzvah itself, like he said there, the Shem mitzvah mamish Havaya. Mem Tzadik Vav Hey is Yud Kei Vav Kei, except the Mem Tzadik replaces Chiluf in exchange through the exchange of Ad Bash, when you replace a Tuf with an Aleph with a Tuf, meaning the first and the last letter, Beis and a Shin. So the Yud is a Mem, and the Tzadik is a Hey. So the mitzvah itself, the very word, is the name Havaya. And then he explained why then is it mitzvah, why is it not Yud Kei Vav Kei? But la'asid it will be Yud Kei Vav. So that's what he's referring to now. So what do we learn? The mitzvah saying be'esi is the Havaya. But Kfar Nizbar Le'il, he adds in the parentheses. And it was also explained earlier. The esi is Havaya and B'chinas Kelim. Because Havaya too is made up of Eris and Kelim. When you say Havaya, there's a Yud Kei Vav Kei, there are 4 letters with different shapes. And as we learned there, and in many places, these shapes are channels for the energy. Yud is a dot, it's a tzimtzum, concentrated point. A Hey is an expansion. A Vav is a transmission, hamshach. And the last Hey is again expansion. And he explained that Yud Kei Vav Kei is Chachma Bina Zah Malchus, or Atzllus Bria Yitzir Asiyah. So there's an aspect of Kalim where the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the letters themselves are like Kalim, like letters on a page, or letters of expression. And then there's the energy within Yud Kei Vav Kei, the oyer within it. So he said like this. So he actually qualified on page 12, that I just said, 1274, he said, I just want to read these words because it's relevant to our discussion. He said like this. So he spoke, Dagam de Shem Havaya. I'm reading on page 1274. Havaya is the level of work. For example, Elikim and Kael are far more connected to Kalim because their role is to really limit the flow and so on, like a Keli. Havaya, it actually says in some places that the Keli is like an Oyer because it's a Shem HaMiyuchad, Shem HaMefeir, Shem HaEtzem. It's a unique name, Havaya. She says, so even though Havaya is Mekol Mokim B'chinas Ha'esi is the Havaya, Hem B'chinas HaKelim, Rak Shem B'chinas Pnimius HaKelim. The inner part of the Keli, which its role is primarily to store the Ur. The Chitzenius HaKeli is to be mamshich the Ur outside of the container, like a cup that you drink from or you pour from. Pnimius HaKeli, that's what he discussed back there. And he spoke about the letters are the way the energy flows, and he went on to speak about the Prate Shemus, Svirus, Shem Havaya, V'nikut Patach, Ab, Sag, Ban, and Ma. But the bottom line is, just a second, Tashem Shemetay Magbus Er, and this is the previous, fine. Previous Kelim, back on the bottom of page 1274. So he says, the Kfan is barely ill. The Asius Havaya B'chinas Kelim, which of course connects it also mitzvahs, because mitzvahs also have Eris and Kelim. Just like a mitzvah has Yud Kei and Vav Kei, there's a Pnimius and a Chetsheni. The mitzvah, the Kelim, of course, is the mitzvahs themselves. They are manifest, they're tangible. They're specific mitzvahs. It's not just Ratzon Elyon, God's will, seamless, shapeless will. It came in a specific thing that on Sukkot, I want you lekachtem lechem, to take an esrog and a lulav and dal minim, and on Pesach to eat matzah, and every day to say krishma, put on tefillin, talis. So it has kalim to it. However, it's the kalim of the Eibishter's kalim, like Eivari de Malchus, like God's limbs, the king's. It's an extension of godliness. So he said the following. So now, so the Atzllus, so fine. So it's kalim. V'yashlemer the teiro b'chinas ha'oyer. The Shem Havaya v'amitzvos hem b'chinas ha'kelim. So now he adds a little component here, which of course will help us understand the picture better. He says, Yeshlemer, that Torah is the Oyer of Havaya, and Mitzvos is the Kelim of Havaya. Now, in general, Torah also has letters. So you could say Torah also has Oyeris and Kelim, but in general, we say the Pasuk says, Kiner Mitzvah, the Torah Oyer. So the question is asked, what's the difference? Ner is a flame, a candle. So why do we say Ner by Mitzvah and by Torah you say Oyer? So one of the explanations is because a Mitzvah is more Keli, because you do something. And a Torah is more the illumination of what God wants you to do. So even though learning Torah is a mitzvah, We're not talking about the mitzvah of learning Torah. We're talking about Torah itself. Torah is an illuminator. Even the word araisa, the Zohar says, means oir yaisa. Yaisa means from the word osif, from the word bringing. It draws and generates and channels oir. So Torah and oir, the word Torah itself, is connected to the word oir. It's an illuminator. It's like an illumination, hira, a direction, guidance, what God wants. What is the actual actions that he wants are mitzvahs. Now, true, some mitzvahs are tangible, mitzvahs maisius. Some are mitzvahs bedibur, and some are mitzvahs machshava or belev. Like Ahavas Yisrael or Avas Hashem is not like a keli in the sense of like tefillin, but the Rebbe already explains in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, and the Rebbe explains that when you say the halacha of a mitzvah, that even mitzvah of Avos Yisrael comes down, how do you express Avos Yisrael? Also through actions, through inviting someone, through giving them, helping them. It's not just Avos Yisrael, I have love in my heart. So there's always some form of keli when it comes to mitzvahs. Now, Torah has an element also of something that manifests, like he explains in Tanya, the Torah comes down from the highest levels down and talks about things of this world, as well as it comes into Oisius, like he says of Tanakh, the very letters of the Torah. But the primary role of Torah is Oir. And the primary role of mitzvah is Ner. Ner is more of a candle, a flame. But Ner is a candle, which a candle always includes a keli. It's not just the flame, it's the wick. And it's where the wick and the oil are residing in a keli. A Ner is all of them. When you say a Ner, you mean not just the light that generates. So that's the point. Later he's going to speak more about Ner Mitzvah and Torah Er. But here in context of what we're discussing here, he's saying Torah is the Er of Havaya and Mitzvahs is the Kelim of Havaya, meaning the Oisius. Shem Havaya v'Mitzvahs hem b'chinas HaKelim. But this shouldn't be confused that one, it's not exclusive. They both overlap, obviously, because Mitzvahs also generate Oir and are connected to it. But as we spoke earlier, especially where it said 1251, but also when he asked the question about how do mitzvahs accomplish this, so I just want to refer you back to the bottom of page 1266 and 1267, where he said clearly, how you do a b'sheidish ramachim successor, shema nikrim ramachi vorin mechinas hakelim the essence spheres that the mitzvahs are connected to kelim. That was where he went to the whole point. So what's the power of a mitzvah? Because it's rooted, the kelim, in the highest levels. Yeah. Like there is Shemo. One second. Yeah, an interesting piece, actually, I just realized on page 1267, which we'll go back to, that now when we're reading what we're learning now, we better understood the end of the paragraph on 1267. I see, just caught my eye, but the shamis and mitzvahs, that they're both connected to kelim.
Which part of 1267?
The end of the paragraph, the middle, the top paragraph. Yeah. I'll go back to that. I don't want to confuse matters right now. I'll go back to, let's continue learning here, because I see here that a picture is emerging now that we have that Torah is the Oir of Havaya and Mitzvahs is the Kelim, and then you have the Kelim of the Neshamas, which are higher than Torah and Mitzvahs, and you have the Mesiras Nefesh of Etzma Neshamas. So I'm just thinking out loud here, all these pieces together are critical to accomplish our mission in this world. But now he's explaining how mitzvahs alone require the neshamas and their Mesiras Nefesh. So I don't want to come to any conclusions. I'm just pointing out that he's talking about all these moving pieces. So just keep in mind, we'll get back to it more in detail as we learn this. Just wanted to point it out, and I see 1267 is a piece of this as well, and probably
The whole
more
entire
places.
thing is a big Chiddush, no? The whole entire thing that
It depends for whom. For somebody that never learned Aleph Beis is also a chiddush. I mean, a chiddush, you mean compared to what you've learned in the past? That's what you mean?
yeah.
Look, there's a lot of yesh leimers here, so clearly there's chiddushim.
It
And
says,
yeah,
Tanig Atzmi Mamish Lemailo Mepchinas Tanig Atzmi what's an Atzmi Teo Mitzvos.
that's what we're learning now. So there are chiddushim here. I can't say that everything said here, you're not seeing all of the places. It does talk about, we know that neshamas are higher than Torah. It's not the first place it says this. That's the Tana D'Elio, and Chassidus explains it. Let's continue. My goal here is really first, let's try to absorb and learn what the Rebbe Rashab says, and then we will explain and try to analyze it, and then we can then revel in the euphoria of the Chiddush itself. Yeah. So he says like this. So now, the parentheses added, the Eshis Havaya B'chinas Kelim, and it explained the different Torah is Erev Havaya and Kelim and Mitzvos is Kelim. This is going to be relevant to the bigger picture soon. But let's continue after the parentheses. So now we continue. And it's known, the Shem Havaya hu be'Atzllus. Okay. Shem Havaya is not Atzllus. Now, let me explain this again, because you'll say, 1 second, didn't we learn that Havaya is before the Tzimtzum? And you have Havaya in Bria, you have Havaya in every world. He said it explicitly before. So this again, if you're not used to the style of Chassidus, you have to remember that we're not talking here about a cupboard, lahavdil, where the salt is on one shelf and the pepper on another, and this is here and this is not physical realities we're talking about. Whenever you're talking about levels, that's why Chassidus says, why it says b'china. It means it's not exactly black and white. So in general, when you say the Shem Havaya, you're saying this is God's 4 letters of how God transmits energy. So in essence, all levels of Atzllus, you could have Yud Kei Vav Kei. I mentioned that Atzllus Bria Yitzir Asiyah is also Yud Kei Vav Kei, as well as the Spheres. Chachma Bina Zohar Malchus is Yud Kei Vav Kei. And you have Yud Kei Vav Kei in Keser, you have Yud Kei Vav Kei in every level. He actually mentioned, if you remember, Yud Kei Vav Kei, he spoke about in Atzllus and Bria and so on. But when you talk in general terms, where do you place Havaya? He says Havaya is not Atzllus. So that's the level. Havaya is not Atzllus. What about Atzllus? The Kamoi Kain, now we know in Atzllus itself, there's Atzllus the Klolos and Atzllus the Proteus. Remember, macrocosm, microcosm. And just to refresh, if those that if you don't remember or you'd like me to just repeat it, that everything is like a hologram. It's both on a macrocosm and in a microcosm. It's like we say, Olam Katan Zel Adam. A human being is a universe, a microcosm. And then it says in the Medrash as well that Adam Gadol Zel Elam. The universe is like a human being in macrocosm. So in other words, everything has its microcosm, its macrocosm. In the world, the 4 worlds, we talk in general, even though it's infinite repeats in different levels, but generally 2. The microcosm is Atzllus Bria Yitzir Asiyah, the one we're most accustomed to. But it's called Abiyah the Proteus. That's the word in Chassidus. Abiyah Atzllus Bria Yitzir in microcosm. This is from the Maimer Drush Gimel Mini Adam of the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek, mentioned many times. In macrocosm, Atzllus the Klolos. So Abiyah the Klolos in macrocosm, Atzllus the Klolos is Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, and primarily the Eir as it is being prepared to enter the Tzimtzum and ultimately create existence. As it relates to it, Bria the Klolos is Olam of Ak, Adam Kadmon. Yitzira the Klolos in macrocosm is Akudim, Nekudim, or sometimes Atik and Arich. That's how the Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek says, Oy Atik and Arich. And the Asiya the Proteus. Hold on, let me finish. Asiya the
Can
Proteus.
Can you stop
I see
talking over the Rav, man?
Excuse me?
The Drush Gimel Mini Adam is an
Just asking
middle of
someone to
speaking.
stop talking over you. It's so annoying.
Right. I'm trying to finish an idea. Please, it's not just you and I. There are other people here. So, an Asiya the Proteus includes Abiyah, Asiya the Klolos, rather. In Macrocosm, Asiya is Abiyah the Proteus. So the last level in the Macrocosm is actually encompasses the 4 levels in Macrocosm. So there you have it. Now, I've mentioned Drush Gimel Mini Adam many times. I've even given the page numbers, and I would expect that you just write it down and look it up.
No, my question is in which book?
So I can't right now go do it again. At least if my memory, I
Gimel
probably
Mini
mentioned,
Adam is in Eura Torah. Which sefer is this?
yeah, but you know how big Eira Teda is? How will it help you if it's an Eira Teda? It's an Eira Teda Bolok and Eira Teda Inyanim. The pages
Thank
you're
you.
going to have to look up. Okay. Now, and tell me when you look it up and write down the pages. So for the future, we'll know. So he's saying now this idea of Havaya and Atzllus. He says the Kamoi came by Erein Sof Shalifni had Tzimtzum, and same thing with Erein Sof pre-Tzimtzum. Hu b'chinas Atzllus the Klolos is the level of Atzllus in Macrocosm, and since we just said Havaya is not Atzllus, so it's the level of Havaya. V'hainu b'chinas Shmoi. So we say Actualize Nivra Elam Hoyahu Shmoi Bolvad. That till the world was created, which means Nivra Ha'elam. That's already Bria. That's Atzllus. That would be Bria the Klolos or Proteus. Ak, that's after the Tzimtzum. So Hayahu v'Shmoi. What's Shmoi? Shem Havaya. That's the level of Atzllus the Klolos. And as we discussed this earlier, the level of Shmoi and Hu and the different levels, when he spoke about the root of the Kalim and the root of the Mitzvos, what they draw down from. We talked about the Helam and the Gili. Okay. So this is the level of Havaya. Both Atzllus, both in microcosm and macrocosm. U'kamoishin is boy le'il, dibra maschal ba'aleischa gimel. Like as it was explained earlier, the third ba'aleischa, which they refer below to volume 2, that's in volume 2 of Ayin Beis. Be'inyan Havaya hu v'shmoi. I'm sorry, be'inyan Hayahu v'shmoi, what I just said. Hayahu v'shmoi belvad. So there it's explained about Hu and Shmoi. What's the difference in Hu and Shmoi? Him and his name. So he explained the Hu, the level of Hu, Hainu. When you say Hu, you're not saying Ato. Ato means you, Nosha Noichach, that's he's present. It means it's a state of revelation. Hu is Lashanistat, he. When you say Ato you, he, who. So he says that's Bechinas Helam, Ha'oyer she'ena Bechinas Gili Gam La'atzmei. So he explained there and other places as well, that when you say the level of Hu, you're referring to a state of concealment in the divine before the Tzimtzum, or even in this case, it's probably talking before the Tzimtzum. She'ein b'chinas gilei gam la'atzmei. That it's a level of concealment and not revealed, even to himself it's not revealed. I know everybody jumped then, what does that mean? So I explained this a number of times, I hope you remember, that the idea of Gilui, from the point of view of Atzmus, is a Yerida, not an Aliyah. God does not need to reveal himself. He doesn't need to be conscious, he doesn't need to be aware. The words consciousness and awareness and revelation are language that we relate to. That when you're not aware of yourself, you're not aware of something, it's like, that means you don't know. By the Eibishter, he is reality and does not need to reveal it to himself. So there's a level that precedes so-called consciousness. And that's why you say it's not revealed to himself. Doesn't mean that he's not aware. It doesn't mean that he's lacking knowledge of it. It means he's beyond it. He's above the whole idea of Gili. So the level of who is Helam Ha'er, which is not a gili even to himself. So an example, a distant example for this would be that even before you consciously think about an idea that you're going to present, let's say you have to make a presentation, you're going to give a class or a lecture or a talk, or you're going to write something. So there's stages. Before you even began having a thought about the idea is in your mind somewhere. It could be something you studied and learned, and it's stored in your brain, in your mind. But you know what? You're not thinking about it. How many ideas that we've developed, that we've learned over the years, that we're very clear about even, that you're not thinking about right now. But then comes one morning or one day, and you said, you know what? Someone asked you a question, or for whatever reason you feel now's the time has come, I want to deliver a talk on this topic. What's the process? You retrieve in your arsenal, in your archives, in your concealed inventory, the idea. You begin to think about it. That's gili la'atzmei. Till that point, there was no gili la'atzmei either. It was in your consciousness, but not in a conscious way, meaning in your psyche, I should say, in your mind. Now you've so-called accessed it. You begin to think about it to yourself. You start preparing it. Then it comes dibur sheba machshava. You start putting it into words, but there's still, as you're speaking to yourself about and preparing to speak to another, and then you get up and you share it with a student or with a class or with a group. And that's gilui lezulas. You're revealing it to another. So the revealing to another, behind that comes the revealing first to yourself. And behind that, there was no revelation altogether. It's just an example, even though it's not a perfect example, because we as human beings, our mind has the idea. When you talk about etzem, or in this case, where he's talking about who, is a level where he doesn't need to have it so-called. It's not necessarily defined yet. And then comes the level when it becomes defined to himself, and then it becomes defined for other, and that also has many stages. If you may recall, we learned in volume 2 and then Tzadik Daled, the state where consideration, deliberation, and determination. We first said Heskim, that he's going to consider it. And then Shakavitaria, he deliberates over it. And then Hachlota, he comes to determination. And that too goes through stages. A general determination that he wants to have creation, a home. And then a specific one where he thinks about the details of the home. And all this is prior to even beginning to build a home. That was something we learned back. So you just see that when you really think about it, even though we live very much on the surface level, but when you go behind the scenes of any process, you're going to come to states before it become a tangible and defined reality. So he's saying who, the level of who, remember, who is still not Atzllus. Hoyahu Shmei Bavad is already a state, like he's going to say in a moment, but it's a state of who, and that's why you can't say Ato. You say who. It's like the distant, the Lashon Nister, the in third person. Like when I say you, I'm speaking to you, I see you, and you see me. If I say him, he did something, I'm telling you about something that you're not seeing, that we're talking about something outside of our right now, it's not revealed to us. So you're talking about it in the state of a who. So he says, who is Lush is Helam? I'll read it again. Helam Ha'esh, Ein B'chinas Gili Gam La'atzmei. Now he says now, V'hu B'chinas Hamshachim in Atzllus. You can't say there's no Hamshach. There's Hamshach from Atzllus because already something is manifest, but it's a state of concealment and no revelation yet. Rak She'ein B'chinas Gili Klal. So it's a state, but it's not in any revealed way yet. Like it says elsewhere, and we learned about this also earlier. Now, why does God need to go through all these steps? Why can't he just jump from out? Because again, he wants, number one, that we should understand the process. And if he just jumped Kol Yochel, he can do anything he wants. He wants it to be in steps like thought, speech, action, and before thought, these higher states of concealment, because he wants us to understand. And also, for Havaya purposes, we need to have stepping stones for us to be able to climb and identify and relate to these levels, like I've always explained. For these both reasons, both in understanding the process in a way that makes sense to us, that we can then, and then also to have a relationship, you need to be able to understand these steps. And that's why they're made. So now we explain who. And what's the level of Shemai? If who is this level, what's Shemai? Shemo b'chinas Shem Havaya. Shu b'chinas Gilui Eir. This is now Gilui Eir. We're talking now a state of revelation. Because Havaya, just by the meaning Yud Kei Vav Kei, you're already saying something. And we spoke Yud Kei Vav Kei is an element of a process of Gilui. The Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. Even though it's true, in Yud Kei Vav Kei itself, the Yud Kei is still a Gili La'atzmei, but it's a Gili La'atzmei, if you remember. And Vav Kei is how the Atzmei himself is already preparing to give to the other. And this goes back to what he explained on page, we need to refer to it because it's going to be relevant here. On page 1275. Yeah, there's the Yud Kei and Vav Kei. Yeah, worthwhile looking there again. So Yud Kei Vav Kei is already a Gili. Like it says elsewhere, he's referring to many different places here. You keep saying clearly there's a lot more to it. And it's explained more elaborately elsewhere, but he's using only what's relevant. He's only quoting, citing that which is relevant here. And it was also explained above, the inyan atu hu havaya levadecha, that you, hu atu hu havaya levadecha, you are God alone. So he says the ata, hainu, b'chinas atzmus. Now he's referring to ata as being higher than who? Atzmus. She'ena shayich b'yizbarich inyan helam v'gilui. So why is it higher? We said before ata is gilui. So he says, no, ata here means ata that's higher than helam v'gilui. Because sometimes ata could be the level you, not you because I see you, but you because you're omnipresent. Like when we say atzmus is not subject to gilui and helam altogether. All these levels we're talking about are in order for us to understand the process in a way that how does a divine reality, which is completely beyond us, relate to us and how we can relate to him. That's all already in the process where you already have oir and hamshacha. So first you have helam oir and there's no gili la'atzmei either. Then there's gili la'atzmei to himself and so on. But atu hu havaya levadecha, he says, atu b'chinas atzmus she'ena shayba yizbarach inyan helam v'gilui. So ata elosha nechel, like it says, ata, when you speak about atzmus, like he says in Torah Eir, that even children, even simple people say, the Eibishter is here. So even though they have no understanding, but the fact that God exists. So it's not a revelation. It's just the fact that there's atzmus is everywhere, as he puts it there. Shem Shamayim Shagar B'fikol, Kihu Motzei. He says exists everywhere. Okay, so that's ata, Shem Shavran. Who? When you say ata, who? Havaya. Because you say both the word ata, then you say who? Who hainabchinas erein sof, the shaykh by helam v'gili. And then comes the level of who. Now we're talking about erein sof, not atzmus. And erein sof, there you could say revealed or concealed. You could have erein sof in a state of concealment, even not revealed to yourself, a state of presence, of mitzias nimtza. So something is there, it's a field of energy, but it doesn't mean it's revealed in any way. And then there's a state where it can be revealed. So therefore, what he's adding here now is that ata is completely behind helam and gili. Who is the level of helam in the oir, and ushmoi, who ushmoi bolvad, is the level of gili in the oir, yud kei vav kei. Okay. But now there's more to this. I'll explain this.
Could I ask something?
Go ahead.
The who is, he said, is Helem Ho'oyer She'enoi B'vchinas Gilui Gam Le'atzmoi. Shmoi, he said, is Shem Havaya Shu B'vchinas Gilui Oyer. What kind of a Gilui Oyer? Le'atzmoi or even Lacherim?
I just explained it. Didn't you hear what I said? He goes back before. It's both. Yud Kei is La'atzmei and Vav Kei is L'zulas.
This is part of Shmoi, right?
Shema is Havaya. Yeah.
But who is Enoi Gilui Gam Le'atzmoi?
Yep. Okay. Now he's
Thank you.
continuing. Yeah. Ach, b'chinas hu, einai helam shel hagilui. Now he's breaking this further down. The level of who is not the helam of the gilui. Elohu b'chinas helam be'etzem. Okay. Again, an idea that we've discussed many times recently as well. and especially in volume 1, and that in Helam itself, there are two types of Helam. You could have a Helam that's a Helam Shalagili. What that means is, right now it's concealed. I may have something in my hand right now. You can't see it. But as soon as I open my hand, you see it. So it's also a Helam. But you can't call it a fundamental concealment. It's not fundamentally concealed. It's just concealed for the moment. Something is in a closet. Something that is a milsa vida legluya, there's an expression. It's not revealed yet, but it can be revealed any given moment. It's just a matter of finding out. So that's called Helam of the Gili. Then there's a Helam, it's called Helam Atzmi, or Helam Be'etzem, is what he calls it here. We learned it earlier about Moiches Tima, that there's two levels in the superconscious. A superconscious that's right now, it's concealed, and then ultimately it will be revealed in some fashion. And then there's a Helam Etzem that is never going to be revealed. It fundamentally is a level that always remains beyond revelation. But it's still not Atzmus. It's still not Ata. So something is there, but it's not a state of Gili. And why is that so important? I want to just make sure you understand this. Because this is, in a sense, like an interface between Atzmus that's completely beyond Helam and Gilui, and Gilui, and the Helam of the Gilui. Because if you didn't have this level of Helam Be'etzem, in a way, there would be a step would be skipped. That ironically and paradoxically, the fact that something remains fundamentally concealed actually creates more of a relationship with a higher state than if it wasn't there. Because if it wasn't there, it would be Atzmus completely removed from Helam and Gili, and the next step would be a Helam Shala Gili and then Gili. But the fact that we can talk about and in some ways even express this Helam Etzem, in a way it's like saying that even in the world of Giluyim, so to speak, Atzmus manifests, but the way it manifests, that always remains something that we cannot access. The not accessing actually gives us access to it. It's like saying when God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you can't see me and live. So why does he tell him that? Why does he need to know that? I mean, why do we need to know? You can't see is fine. Because the mere fact that you know you can't see me, that allows you to see me through shlila, by negating it. So the fact that things remain a mystique and mysterious evokes a certain element of reverence and awe, that you know, I can never own this, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So it actually creates a tremendous level of bittul that the Eibush is beyond us. The fact that he's beyond Helam and Gilui is so beyond, even beyond. There's nothing to say. He's so beyond that he's here everywhere, but we don't experience it in any way that we can relate to. Here, at least, it's like saying you're learning with your teacher, and you realize you're a student, the teacher's far beyond you, but you don't know how far beyond he is. So you could say, you know what, he's beyond me, but in a few years, I'll reach his level. As you grow, you come to realize that the teacher, or the higher you go, you really realize there are things in the teacher that you're not really going to reach so quickly, or ever. And that's not a element of that should in any way demoralize us. On the contrary, it's like coming up to the state where you go climb the mountain to the point where the horizon is so infinite, you realize, wow, you know, when you're lower down in the mountain, you could say the horizon, fine, I'll climb a little higher, I'll master it. You get to a point, that the ultimate knowledge, you realize, you get to such a point of awareness that you realize that it's so infinite, and that itself is an experience. But it's not an experience of you containing it and you owning it. It's an experience of you being bottled to it, completely humbled in the presence of a reality that's completely beyond us. And that's not Atzmus, because Atzmus is, you can't even say that on Atzmus. Atzmus is even beyond that. Atzmus is accessible as much as it's inaccessible. This level is not accessible, yet we come to realize it through this process of this Helam Be'etzem. So he's saying the level of who is that level right now. Now, this is going to be very relevant to where neshamas are rooted and where mitzvahs are rooted, in understanding this process of why neshamas are higher and how you need all these levels. Now, I know what I just said is a pretty heavy piece. I have talked about it in the past, but it's critical to understand properly to be able to really get through this in a way that makes sense. So he says, let me just read a few more lines and then I'll stop. Just want to finish this thing. And this is the level of etzem ha'er. We always talk etzem ha'er. So the obvious question, what do you mean? Ha'er is gili. Why are you calling it etzem? Is it ha'er or is it etzem? And suddenly say etzem ha'er. What does that mean? If you want to speak about the etzem, the etzem. If you speak about ha'er, you already mean ha'er means by definition gili. And yet the Eibishter made it in a way that there's an ha'er in gilui. There's a level of etzem because remember ha'er also comes from Atzllus. So in ha'er, so to speak, in the world of giluyim, there's a world of etzem that is really beyond gilui. That's what etzem ha'er really is. It's how ha'er is rooted in its source. It's not so it's true. It's the source also chooses to reveal, but there's the element of ha'er that all it is God wanting to express. Doesn't mean there's expression yet. Just like there's God wanting to conceal. So the Yechelis, Yecholte Lahayir, Yecholte Shaloleh, we learned earlier, Yechelis is not a state of being, it's God's capacity, the capacity. So if you're talking about Oyr itself, that's already a track that you could say has moved away from the quantum state and it's become Oyr and Gili. It's a track of Gili. Like Lamai Lamaila Aden Ketz, Lamata Mata Aden Tachla, two kavim. The track of Helam is the track that will become concealment, containment, Tzimtzum, and so on. Two tracks. But if you go back to both tracks and you trace them to their source, there's only one source. In the source, Etzem ha'er is Oyr, but in a state of complete Helam. Etzem, let's say Etzem ha'Helam, obviously is completely a state of Helam because it is Helam. But both of them are, as they're rooted, they have an element that's called Etzem ha'er. The Etzem of where Oyr really originates from and what it is fundamentally, Etzem ha'er, like we learned earlier, we talked about Kalim and Eiris. What did he say? That Kalim are rooted in Atzmus Umhus Ha'er, or Ein Sof, Atzmus Umhus Ein Sof. And Eir is rooted in Hispashtus Ha'er. So that's the difference in Etzem Ha'er and Hispashtus Ha'er. Etzem Ha'er, She'en B'chin is Gili Klal. And that's the paradox. It's not Gili at all because it's the Etzem. It's like, you could say it's the concept of Eir. As God wants to become, as God wants to manifest ultimately in Eir. Okay, I think I'll stop here. He's going to give a mashal now from the Koiches HaNefesh. I'll read the mashal quickly and then tomorrow we'll discuss it. U'kumayel derech mashal, top of page 1283. Like for example, HaKoiches HaYulim HaAtzmim, Ima Yesem B'chinas Koiches. So the Hayulim HaAtzmim, remember we talked about Koiches, faculties. A revealed faculty is me right now, let's say using my hand, I'm writing something. A concealed faculty is right before I'm writing it, it's concealed, but it's a helam of the gili. It's just concealed momentarily. But in a moment I can begin to access it. Then there's a helam that's deeper, all the way to the keiches, there's keiches analomim, keiches hiyulim, keiches atzmim. He calls it hiyulim atzmim. This is not the koyach right before it's being revealed. It's in this neshama, the nefesh has these potential and core faculties. The only way you can access it is actually either through serious exertion. You can't just extend, like let's say if you can throw a stone for 100 feet, and if you push yourself a little more, you can throw 150 feet. To get to Yulim Ha'atzmi, you'd need a complete new level to access something that is not accessible usually. But it's there. So you're comparing this level to Yulim Ha'atzmim, even though they're faculties, Hariyem Keiches Atzmim Haklulim Be'etzem, Hariyem Kemoya Etzem. They're core faculties as they're encompassed in the core of the nefesh, of the soul, and therefore they're like the soul, like the etzem. The kamoisha etzem ain't beget the gili be'etzem. Kamoikein hakoiches atzem ain't beget the gili be'etzem. So just like the etzem is fundamentally not in a state of gili, not just concealed from the gili, but fundamentally beyond gili, so too these faculties, these core faculties are not beget the gili be'etzem, fundamentally beyond. And the same as etzem ha'er hu. And then that is also this level that's not together gili. It's not even in the realm of revelation. It's fundamentally concealed. You could almost say it's like two states of quantum, if even. And Havaya next is going to be the level of Gili, and that we're going to stop here. So this is just an example, but I will elaborate more on the example tomorrow. But what he's explaining here is going into levels we have spoken about before, but he's giving more language and more understanding of it. And this is also preparing to understand the shamas and mitzvos about Havaya. Mitzvos, remember, are connected to Havaya. So you can imagine mitzvos are going to be connected to the Gili. And the shamas are going to be connected to the who. But let's not jump. That's the direction he's going. So I'm going to stop here. And I would suggest, if you want more explanation on this I'll do tomorrow. But if you need any clarification of what we learned now, I'm happy to answer any questions.
This is fascinating.
Yeah.
I have a question. It's related, but in some part not. The etzem ha'or, is that describing how the or is davuk to Atzllus? It's not Atzllus, but because the or is so close to Atzllus that it is the aspect of or that has an aspect of Atzllus in it, sort of the yeshus of Atzllus. That or we know is light.
Not necessarily.
In general.
Not necessarily.
No. But you understand my
Not
question?
necessarily. He doesn't say it here. You're trying to bring Basiligani into this, right?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, but he doesn't say it here. So it's not necessarily the meaning of this here right now.
Although I
that
think
could-
that
that-
Basiligani cites the, I'm not sure. I have to go back and look, but he cites the Rabbi Rashab. I'm not sure if he cites it here, but I'll have to go check.
Even if he cites here, it doesn't mean this is the meaning of what he's saying here.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? So we'll stop here at the top of page 1283. I'm going to go over it quite a few times to really wrap my heads around this, because you're dealing literally with paradoxes that are very difficult to understand. Helem, Gili, fundamentally concealed. But I gave a few examples. I'm going to give more. And this is ultimately going to be understood if you find examples in your life for this. Okay, so I'm going to stop here.
Can you give some examples in your life? I mean, this
I
is
will.
really esoteric. Yeah.
I will. I gave already an example about
Yeah.
climbing the horizon. I gave the example of a teacher. I've already given some examples, but I will do that in the next year. We'll stop here at the top of page 1283.
Thank
Wanted
you.
to say something?
I said that Havaya is Shmoy. Ato hu Havaya.
Yeah. Ata is Atzmus, who is the Helema Etz Be'etzem, and Havaya is going to be the Gili. That's going to come next. If you read on, you'll see. Havaya becomes Gili.